Continuing our discussion of the Mummy series, we look at the 1999 version directed by Steven Sommers and the 2017 starring Tom Cruise, which was supposed to have been the start of the Dark Universe. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hi there.
Something different this time I thought we'd do was kind of talk a little bit about what we're watching and what we're looking forward to seeing both on in the theaters and on our smaller screen.
Yeah, so I'll go first. I've just watched Squid Game, which I enjoyed quite a lot.
Okay.
I thought that was quite interesting. I think I don't know if I would have mentioned it to you, but I think that along with Parasite, clearly Korean TV and filmmakers are far less afraid of having a brutal display of inequality in society. And so I think that's what's really kind of satisfying, and maybe why this has captured so much of the imagination of viewers. I'm not watching the new James Bond movie, but I will be watching Dune next week.
Nice. Yeah, and as we talked about offline, I did watch it, and looking forward to kind of at least discussing it between us, if not possibly in some. We'll kind of leave it under wraps for now, like the possibility of a discussion about it with the remake series and stuff. And of course, I'm absolutely looking forward to watching Dune in the big screen. On the smaller screen, I have been really enjoying, Ted Lasso. It's just, as much as I love these movies and shows that cover more deeper issues and stuff, Ted Lasso really doesn't do that. It's not, but it's by no means a superficial watch either, because it does kind of get more to the drama between the characters but in a way that's both humorous and touching at times and stuff. So So with that, I think we'll just start talking about the 1999 version with Brendar Fraser and Rachel Weisz.
Comparing our part 2 of our Mummy series here. So it's the 1999 and the 2017. A Stephen Sommers joint, really, the 1999 one, written and directed by him, I believe. Quite a departure from either the Hammer horror version or the original, really. Very similar themes, though, to the original, in that we have this kind of theme of forbidden love. In this one, it's the Pharaoh's concubine who's sort of displays somewhat of a kind of revenge with independence against the pharaoh by her and her lover, in this case Imhotep, sort of attacking him.
I think what was interesting is that they spent a number of years, like pretty much from the 80s on, in the kind of the development hell, because at different points, George Romero, Clive Barker, even Mick Garris, who we covered in the Stephen King adaptations of The Stand and The Shining, were kind of, tapped to kind of try to develop, probably what would have been a darker, by far version of it. But instead, we have this kind of Disney-esque action adventure with a lot of nods to the Indiana Jones series and stuff. It's very much kind of like something that we would see, kind of very similar to what Lucas and Spielberg did. On the other hand, I think some people have talked about this as kind of marking the end of the adventure era, kind of that we really don't see, anything like that from then on in. And I think partially what happened was we had the rise of the, Marvel and just the different superhero movies that kind of really gained popularity.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget we had Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull released not too long after this, and that clearly marked the end of the adventure genre. You're right. It's kind of about the start of the superhero movies starting to sort of I suppose we had The Matrix as well, as about the same kind of time as well as this. It's a very different movie from The Matrix, but yeah. Absolutely. No, I mean, this is, for all its similarities, it's a very different feeling and pace, obviously, from the 1931, considerably more action and a much higher budget and lots more effects.
Oh, yeah.
And loads of CGI. But a very fun movie, though. I think it's like it's hard to knock this one because it's just a good fun time. Um,
Ironically, like Roger Ebert, the way that he describes it in his review is, there's hardly a thing I can say in his favor, except I was cheered by nearly every minute of it. I cannot argue for the script, the direction, the acting, or even the mummy, but I can say that I was not bored. At times I was unreasonably pleased.
yeah,
It's I guess one of those kind of reviews that kind of says it all. That like in the sense of that it was a movie that like you really find it hard to not like.
yeah. I mean, I think what makes it work is you've got a lot of very it's kind of a light-hearted kind of comedic feel to all the main characters as a they're not nothing terribly inspiring, but quite sort of pleasant and easy to watch. They also seem to bounce off each other reasonably well. It's funny in a way. He criticizes directing, but I think there's a very effortless feel about this movie in terms of the delivery and just the way they bounce off each other.
Yeah.
But it's combined with actually kind of quite subtle horror elements that are quite it's quite horrifying, really. The way Imhotep actually dies, being eaten alive by beetles and people having their flesh stripped and things like this. It's definitely got like it's weird because it almost feels like a kids movie, but with kind of almost horror effects in it, which is kind of, I think, what makes it quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It has those, like you said, horrific deaths. It also has like kind of these plagues that are just kind of really pretty nasty too. I mean, they do call back to the Moses story, really. But like it's funny how like there were like these several plagues that kind of are revisited. Like as the mummy's kind of turning back to his more corporal form and stuff. And I think that's another interesting thing. I don't think we've seen it before. It's something that we see more in like some other horror, where the being is kind of slowly becoming more themselves, as they gain their power. But then it's like through sucking the life energy out of their victims and stuff. And then, of course, by the time they're more whole, if you will, they're really at their most powerful and stuff.
Yeah, well, I thought what was interesting about this was that, as we saw in Bram Stoker's Dracula, they borrowed this theme of lost love over many, many hundreds of years. And in this, we're seeing the mummy borrow from Nosferatu in a way, because he is this bringer of plagues where he travels.
Oh, right.
So they've just kind of reinvented that with the Moses or the biblical plagues in this instead. But yeah, you're right. This idea that and he is quite vampiric in this one, because we have this sort of group of and that's the thing. You've got a nice kind of team element in this, in that you've got team good guys with Rick O'Connell, Brendar Fraser, Rachel Weisz, and her brother Jonathan, and then you've got team bad guys, which is 4 American tomb raiders. One's a kind of a cowboy character, one's a kind of an intellectual, and the other one, I don't know, he's just the other one. And and there's these, so
they have this guy Kevin O'Connor playing this kind of dweeb Benny that is kind of like will turn on a dime. He's kind of like the Renfield, I guess, for
the Renfield,
the bad team.
Absolutely, or the kind of Igor from Frankenstein or something like that. They've kind of merged all of those into the Benny character. But so they get these 4 not so honorable tomb raiders, because there's some who are good and not. They all get their life force sucked out of them in an effort to rebuild the mummy. But it's just, I mean, and it makes for an interesting visual quality, because you go from something that's quite sort of, in theory, horrifying at the beginning, becomes more and more human as the movie goes on. So it's kind of funny in that it almost starts much more like a horror style movie about the mummy, and turns more and more into a kind of an Indiana Jones movie the more human he becomes in a way as well. But it's an interesting effect. I mean, I suppose you had something in Bram Stoker's Dracula where it was almost, it was his desire to be young again, and his desire for Mina that drove him to drink more blood and renew himself. So it's similar kind of structure, I guess, but different things providing the motive to do it.
Yeah, and what also was a thing that actually, I don't know why, but this movie in particular brought out this idea that in horror movies, a lot of times we have these kind of rules, and they're kind of like these puzzles that, like, check and engage us to kind of see if we're paying attention, and that's kind of like the fun part for the audience. And if it's done wrong, it frustrates or confuses us. But or at worst, not care. But if it's done right, we really get sucked into, like, kind of like seeing, like, like, kind of will the heroes kind of either subvert this rule or use it to advantage, or will they fall victim to it and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think video games have a lot to answer for with that, because if you notice that things like Indiana Jones definitely started a lot of that. That you've got to have the right weight on the idol to make sure the thing doesn't fall, to make sure the thing traps don't get you. And then by the time you got The Last Crusade, well, you've got like a whole video game level at the end of the movie in order to get to the Grail. And so in this one, you've got much similar things. You've got a key that they've got to find. They've got to find the right book. They've got to find, and I would say that's more the focus of this movie, is more kind of fulfilling these mini quests, like in a video game, but also the whole focus of this is taken away from the relationship between Imhotep and possibly the reincarnation of Anaxan and Moon, and they've put it more about the location. It becomes like, we've got to find Hamunaptra, the city of the dead and things. So they've kind of replaced which gives it a much more which gives you the scope to make it more of a kind of an action adventure movie, rather than playing off the dramatic kind of relationship angle of the original. But I mean, obviously all the same characters though, and similar motives and things. I guess you didn't have a Rick O'Connell in the first one. The original boyfriend was fairly ineffectual. Whereas, Rick O'Connell's a kind of an alpha male dude who's like, shooting down mummies and smashing them up and things. Every occasion.
Yeah, it definitely kind of, whereas like the original Mummy focuses more on the mummy and the fact that, like, he's trying to terrorize everybody in pursuit of his love and stuff. This one is kind of like where that's more takes more backseat to the fact that, like, Rick O'Connell is trying to basically find his treasure, but along the way develops a love interest, and it's kind of like more like I said, classic hero story and stuff.
Yeah, but we've got a bit more kind of we're slightly more modern here, in that we have the woman representing the brains of the operation, and Rick O'Connell's kind of like the brawn. But we also, I mean, I thought it was nice that in a way they still paid homage to the original by having an Ardeth Bay character.
That's true.
But in this, he's actually a separate. He's not the mummy. He's he's actually like these kind of guardians of the tomb, making sure no one releases him. But yeah, we have a secret order in this one as well. Another classic late 90s, early 2000s theme, protecting the ancient secrets.
Right. I thought that was an interesting kind of twist, because that again, it's like kind of checking to see if you are, as a fan, we're kind of like we're just expect Ardeth Bay to kind of like basically be the almost like a villain to our hero or the party and stuff like that. But instead, they subvert that because spoiler as always, that he's more just trying to, like you said, protect it, but like kind of but he's not kind of in any way like like, in fact, once at a certain point, then the heroes and his goals align, so then they're all trying to stop the mummy together and stuff.
Yeah that was one of those sort of things where it was kind of convenient for the story, but you would have thought the Guardians would have just taken them all out if it was maybe not. I mean, they also pay a little bit of homage to the original by making Evie, Rachel Weisz's character, have this genetic lineage. She is part Egyptian as well, much like the original. The other thing that's kind of I mean, in terms of the mummy's powers, in the original, obviously he has telekinesis, that he's able to manipulate objects, but he also has this kind of very direct, personal telepathy with, the main love interest. In this, he doesn't. It's a control over nature and this ability to control people's minds, because there's a part where he enslaves the entire town. But his telepathy only works, as you notice, similar to the original, on Egyptians for whatever reason, but not Evie, even though she's part Egyptian. It's obviously very particular power that he has there. But yeah, still somewhat, they still has somewhat of that sort of telepathic from the original telepathic power there. So definitely. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting too, like as a more modern update is like now we have like kind of these like the lock, right, for the that's used on the tombs and all kind of stuff. It's like it reminds me of something more like you said, out of a video game, or like we see now, like kind of in, I don't know, just it's at a certain point it became more in vogue to have like these kind of devices that I'm trying to think of another series. I guess the Dan Brown, like kind of Da Vinci Code, kind of that kind of somewhat not quite steampunk, but it's kind of like that though. That like it's like this kind of outdated, but at the same time, like more modern for its time, so to speak, if that makes sense. Like kind of.
I mean, I think I watched the masterclass that Dan Brown did on his writing, and he's very much in this mode that he tries to create a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter, and a real easy way of doing that is to say, okay, well, we found the key, but then we've got to unlock this, and then we do this. So he said he creates lots of different sort of mini quests within a novel, but there's there's bigger overarching ones. Like there's the constant time threat of someone trying to catch them, and then there's the bigger thing of we've got to unlock the mystery of the Da Vinci Code, and so he has it sort of layered like this of things that you resolve the smaller mysteries more quickly to get people to get through the chapters of the book, but you resolve the bigger ones are more over a longer period. So they've obviously borrowed that in cinema, and that's probably what makes The Mummy such a fun watch, because they've got to get from one thing, they've got to find Hamunaptra, and then once they found that, well, then they've got to open the mummy, and then the mummy's got to get all of his body back together, and then it's like everyone's got a little quest that they all have to go on. So it's pretty cool. I mean, what I did like as well, there's, unlike in a normal horror movie, they do the sensible thing and they just get out of the temple. They awaken the moment. It's like, right, let's get out of here. It's like not often you see that in a pseudo kind of horror movie, but yeah, there's also, I don't know if you noticed, there's a nice little nod to the Terminator in that one of them, when describing the mummy, they say he never eats, he never sleeps, he never stops. And I thought, right, yeah, I've heard that somewhere before. And I guess there's even a kidnapping as well, but unlike the original, where it's through mind power and kind of subterfuge of drawing her in this it's just a more confrontational kidnapping. So yeah, there's lots of elements that borrow from the original all the way through, really, but just a different spin, really.
Yeah, and again, as we talked about with the original, that like we just see the kind of the different of how each one's a reflection of the times. Like besides, of course, like we've already talked plenty about the special effects and stuff. They traveled to Morocco to film this versus the original. They never even left Hollywood and stuff. It's just like kind of a very different era, and it's kind of the movie is a good reflection of it. But it's also, as we talked about, that like it reflects like kind of the end of the action adventure for a while and stuff.
Yeah, I mean they kind of did try it on a few things. I'm sure The Rock's been in a few action adventure movies, in between disaster ones here and there. I mean, I suppose the closest thing I can think of is like Jumanji movies that they've made. That was kind of similar, and even more video gamey than this in the directly kind of references it. But yeah. The other thing I can think of is the symbology or the actual referencing of ancient Egyptian gods is fairly basic in this, in that you have the book of light and the book of, I guess, death or darkness or something. So that's under, which is where they find the mummy in the tomb of Anubis, the jackal-headed Egyptian god. And then they've got to find the book of light, which is under the temple of Horus, or, the sun god. So it's kind of a very kind of basic referencing of that stuff in the 1999.
Oh, I was going to say that's overall one of the things I do enjoy about the Mummy series, versus the other monsters, is getting to the whole Egyptian god or Egyptian mythology stuff.
Well, one of the things actually I wanted to raise in this one that which we didn't talk about in the first video was that the original Mummy talks about him finding a hidden scroll that was created by Thoth, which is this baboon-headed god of ancient Egypt, and he was supposed to be the god of writing. First of all, hieroglyphics are supposed to be attributed to him, and he was also the god of secret knowledge and magic and all these kind of things. But the interesting thing is that Thoth was kind of reinvented as Hermes, and hence that also leads into Hermetic law and Freemasonry and the occult. So there's a lot of connections between, the Thoth, as I mentioned in that, and a lot of the other sort of occult things that come after it.
Right.
And the other thing, which I guess kind of leads us into the 2017 version quite nicely, but Egypt, the old name for Egypt, the ancient name for Egypt was Kemet, and alchemy means al-Kemet, from Egypt, essentially.
Right.
Now, coincidentally, if we start looking at the basis for the 2017 Mummy, which seems very silly when you first kind of look at it, in that the mummy kind of gets trapped and then sent with crusaders back to England.
Right.
But funnily enough, there was a big a lot of people trying alchemy and following it in the 13th and 14th century, which is roughly about when the Crusades finished. So, there's a funny kind of connection there, and I think they even created laws in 1404 to ban alchemy because it was obviously becoming quite popular. But this could be where there's other connections to other kind of secret orders in England, or some of the other more interesting uses of symbolism and things like this around the city of London and stuff. So that was quite it was one of those things that when I first thought it, I thought, good God, what have they done? Why are they trying to just move this to London? But then when I did a bit more reading, I thought, well, okay, this isn't such a terrible stretch.
I think the biggest problem with the 2017 version is that they try too hard to cram things in to create this kind of dark universe thing that they try to architect too much, something that I think was more organically done in other series, that that stories kind of unfolded over the different movies and stuff, that they kind of threw this into this movie, threw this into that movie, and then strung together it became this kind of universe and stuff. I mean, I think maybe part of it was as the the whole MCU slash kind of DC, I think part of it was that they probably weren't really sure how successful they were going to be, and I think I think they kind of just over time it just kind of became more and more kind of that they kind of realize over time that hey, we actually have something here. We can kind of make this kind of this other world that has all these kind of connections and stuff.
Well, I think what they could have done, I mean, they probably looked at the success of the 1999 Mummy, which was which had this, if you look at it in terms of the theme parks, it had this nice crossover between adults and kids, and you thought, oh, maybe we can do something similar with that. We can spin this out. And I actually, for whatever reason, saw the 2017 Mummy in the cinema.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know
And I don't know why I did either, to be honest. But I saw the logo change at the beginning to Dark Universe, and I thought, ooh, it's a new franchise.
Right.
I got kind of suckered into that, but yeah, it was kind of a good idea, but just very poorly executed, I suppose. But I mean, it makes sense really why you're going to try and pull the Mummy to London, because if you're actually using a lot of the Universal characters, England's quite a useful place to place them all, because
that's true.
You know, you can quite, just like most of the Hammer movies were kind of set around England. It's not too far to go from Transylvania to London and things like this, and you've already got Dr. Jekyll there, and so I can kind of see why they were trying to do that.
Yeah, a lot of the stories did kind of revolve around, kind of London, or kind of, like I said, just the places that are relatively close and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I agree that like you can kind of see what they were trying to drive at stuff. I think the problem though, as you kind of also alluding to, is that like that when it's kind of too intentionally driven that way, I think, to me, like, one of the things that kind of was just a little much for even this particular movie was the whole idea of just introducing, the Dr. Jekyll kind of thing. It just, I mean, I understood what they were trying to do, but at the same time, basically make him like a Nick Fury kind of character stuff. But the other hand, it was just like too much of the movie. It was just kind of like, all of a sudden, like, like this guy who, it will change unless he's injected, or like kind of like, what does this have to do with like, the rest of the story and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of crowbarred into this that didn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, yeah, definitely Russell Crowe is the sort of Cockney wide boy, Mr. Hyde, was a bit of a stretch, and I got kind of a bit annoyed at that bit of the movie, really. Russell Crowe's a decent actor, but this was definitely not a highlight of his career. I mean, it's a criticism that you could throw at modern day Marvel movies as well. The perpetuating the franchise seems to sort of and introducing new characters overrides good storytelling a lot of the time. So and this is a victim of that, definitely. I mean, so we've also got it's a bit more of a feminist power mummy in this one, in that because she's been overlooked for her power to the throne, she takes matters into her own hand and claims the power, but gets caught in the act, and there's some sort of quite interesting visual stuff in this, in that you have her as a character manipulating Tom Cruise, who we haven't really talked about. I guess we'll get to him in a minute. But Sofia Botella in this, who is Algerian, so it's nice they got something, an actor from the right continent this time. And there's scenes where she's kind of like dominating him, kind of pseudo-sexually, but then they kind of flip that, and it's almost then like Russell Crowe's organization of monster fighters has got her all chained up in a kind of submissive way as well. There's some stuff going on there, but she seems to be pretty in control, and she's the one enacting her revenge on people, it seems.
I feel like they kind of were just like, we don't really need a mummy and stuff, like kind of in the traditional sense. Like kind of there's no sign of Imhotep. Let's just cut right straight to the sexy girl and stuff. Like kind of like because basically one of the things that kind of really stood out with the 1999 version was, even though she had a more background role, so it was and where like it felt like what they did was they just kind of said, let's just get straight to the attractive girl and stuff, and like kind of we don't need this kind of love story and stuff. And in fact, I feel like that's overall the biggest problem with this, is that like they tried to crowbar, the other thing was they tried to crowbar one of the main things was the love story, and because even like the 1999 version, even though it was an action adventure, there was like the two main parallel stories of love. It was the mummy and kind of the kind of forbidden love, and kind of how that kind of created everything, and then there was a love that kind of developed between Rick and Evie and stuff. And I feel like that was like kind of the heart of what kind of of that one and stuff. And here we just kind of have we have none of that with kind of the Mummy, and then we have none of that really with you know Tom Cruise as Nick Morton stuff. Even though they tried to make it, but I just found like it wasn't believable. It wasn't believable why this kind of self-interested guy, mercenary stuff was suddenly like kind of find like something that he made him want to change and to kind of develop this love for this kind of pretty stock kind of character in Jenny and stuff.
Yeah, with no Egyptian lineage or connection to the story at all, really. And they seem to spend about 20 minutes relying very heavily on his performance or lack thereof in bed for comedic effect.
Yeah.
I mean, they mentioned that like 4 or 5. It's just very tiresome and weak kind of comedy writing. But I mean, you're right though about the 1999, and you have these dual love relationships going on, one in the present day with those, and it's mirrored very nicely with this ancient one as well. So in a way it even kind of keeps that spirit of the original Mummy from 1931, which looks at this. I mean, it's not done in the same kind of depth, I would say, as the 1931, but there's still sort of something there. But you're right in this one, the problem is that you don't feel sorry for her as the Mummy at all. In the 1999, you have some sympathy for Imhotep because he gets sort of brutally murdered and he just falls in love with the. So neither of them are at fault, and they're just a victim of the circumstance. And there is this kind of slightly romantic kind of gesture to him trying to sort of bring her back to life, even though he's butchering people in the process. It's with this, it's like she's just trying to make a power grab, and then she just manipulates a man to be a reincarnation of a god, but there's no real kind of romantic thing. It's all just a kind of a power trip in a way. It's kind of in the interest of switching up roles and making things a little bit more sort of gender equal. They've kind of they've lost something that's sort of the any of that kind of romantic element of the old story.
Well, just something that kind of makes us feel a little sympathy for like kind of the fact that they're killed, and like we care to some degree. I mean, like even though that like the original the 1999 version was kind of a villain and stuff, but like you said, he died a horrific death, so that's horrible. And then the reason why he kind of suffered that was because of this kind of love that was kind of just tragic and everything. And we care like kind of that, like kind of like ooh, it's kind of a bummer that like he had to go this way. And plus like we can kind of understand to some degree that like you fall in love with the wrong girl at the wrong time and stuff, and you're like whoops.
I think another big mistake is trying to set it in modern day in time. Basically it loses some of that kind of classic kind of escapism by setting it in the modern day, I think. And a lot of it seems much less I don't know, mysterious. Just think, well, you just send in a drone strike, and well, I mean, that actually is one thing I want to talk about is they actually get saved by a drone strike in this, which I thought was kind of and there's also this part where they're saying, oh, we're saving these antiquities that would otherwise be destroyed by terrorists in this country. So it's a bit sort of take that as you want, really, propaganda, whatever. But and
then of course, like another way we're kind of like really not sympathetic is Nick's buddy Chris Vail, played by Jake Johnson, is this guy who like he is kind of tagging along and stuff, and then he when he's killed and everything, it's interesting. We'll kind of maybe get to it that like with American Werewolf in London, he kind of has this kind of callback to just like his buddy keeps showing up as this kind of ghost, if you will, and stuff.
And look at his name, Vail. It's like the veil between life and death. And and he's supposed to be a comedic sidekick to begin with, who you are supposed to feel attached to, and then you obviously feel bad that he dies, but he's not very funny.
Not funny.
It's just, I mean, that's the problem. And but the fact that you're absolutely right, you hit the nail on the head there. It's totally American Werewolf in London. The fact that they try to, he keeps popping up, and they try to make him like this kind of creepy reminder of normality, that or that he's subject to the same curse. So it's almost word for word. that respect.
This one is directed by Alex Kurtzman, who for the Star Trek franchise, did the Into Darkness was supposed to be kind of like the mirror of Wrath of Khan and stuff, which you and I have talked about offline. That's not by far not one of our favorite movies and everything. Yeah. But he also did the 2009, so he also did the relaunch and stuff.
Yeah.
So he did co-write that, and that one was directed by J.J. Abrams. So I guess it's like kind of this weird thing with him, and in fact, the other co-writer on that script was Robert Orci, who has uncredited writing, kind of in this version of the Mummy and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
So as a team, there different times they do have the possibility of kind of getting things right, but other times, I think they kind of do this kind of superficial, nods that kind of really, don't add credit to the story and everything. I think that's kind of what we have here.
Yeah. Well, I think as well, you got to remember the writers for this is Christopher McQuarrie, who was on Mission Impossible, as was David Cope, and you've got Dylan Koosman from Jack Reacher. So all experienced Tom Cruise movie writers.
Yes.
Brought into,
and that's probably like a good way to lead into that. Is that what we really have here is a set piece for Tom Cruise. We just kind of go from action to action with him and stuff. And that's like kind of what carries the movie, that kind of keeps us somewhat engaged. But I'll be honest, I fell asleep the first time I watched this, and like I kind of had to watch it again just to kind of really make sure at least I was somewhat awake and paying attention.
Well, they've got him as this kind of lovable Tomb Raider character. They tried to kind of remake Rick O'Connell's character in this as Mick. But he's also a soldier who's kind of pilfering things whilst they're in Iraq somehow. My problem with this is that I don't think the lovable rogue action oriented character really plays to Tom Cruise's strength. He just doesn't do that character very well. He's much better as a kind of a much straighter action hero.
Yeah.
Or someone, or if they're a lovable rogue, it's in a more kind of romantic kind of setting, like kind of, I don't know, Risky Business or Cocktail or something like that. That plays much better to his strengths, I think.
Yeah.
And then as someone who deals with the supernatural, that is just not something that Tom Cruise can pull off. No. It's like he's faced with lots of things, and his reaction is just the kind of Tom Cruise. He just does this a lot all the way through the movie.
Right.
And you're like, this is clearly like the director's trying to get something out of him, and this isn't, there's just a breakdown of communication there. But so I think it just plays, unfortunately, to a lot of his weaknesses, because I do actually like Tom Cruise. I think in things like Vanilla Sky and Magnolia, it was awesome, but this is just not his bag, I don't think. But
I think you hit the nail on the head, though. I think he is very much in his element when it's a real clear and present danger and stuff that he's reacting to. He's in just about any of the Mission Impossible series, he's really in his element when he's like hanging off a jet, or something that kind of like it's really just something that for most of us we kind of like holy crap, that's where he thrives and stuff. But when he's kind of, like you said, it's something that has to be believable. He just I think the problem is he doesn't buy it. So I think if he doesn't buy it, then we're not gonna buy it then.
Wisecracking lovable rogue is just not the role cut out for Tom Cruise.
No.
It's Brendar Fraser does it so effortlessly, which is much kudos to him. But I think what was interesting in this is that in terms of the mummy's powers in this one, they're quite interesting in that she develops these dual pupils, which becomes the signature of when you've got powers imbued by the ancient Egyptian gods. But the connection is actually to the evil eye from Celtic tradition. So it's kind of weird that they've introduced it into something Egyptian, but that's what it originally came from, apparently.
Okay.
There's lots of stuff in Celtic tradition of fairies with double and triple pupils and things like this. So, it's kind of interesting. And what does she do in this one? Rather than being there is almost like Tom Cruise's character Nick in this is almost given remote viewing powers
Oh,
by
right. Yeah.
Mommy, and that he can sort of see where she is, or he can relive moments from her past through his connection with her. And of course, he gets brought back from the dead, which is a weird scene actually, because he spends all this time trying to get a parachute on the girl, but doesn't save himself. So that's a bit strange. It just seems like a bit of a, I don't know. Yeah, I didn't quite understand why they had to kill him off to bring him back within about the first half an hour. It seemed a bit strange, but
it felt very much like plot armor more than anything else. Yeah.
And then of course they give him powers at the end. So it's like, oh, if we do another franchise, we can get Tom back to be like the dude mummy power, ancient Egyptian power guy or something, you know. And they have this whole thing of him going off and searching for something that he's trying to find but can't find it, or something like this. So but what I liked about that with him, you know, stabbing himself and becoming the monster, that really did feel like it was, you know, just crowbarred into the story to subvert people's expectations. And then he even says, hey, I didn't see this coming. It's like,
neither did we.
no, we didn't really want to see it either, but thanks for telling us that we didn't. All right.
And it just kind of just really felt like, you know, like, okay, just let's do it kind of thing. And where it just didn't really fit into like kind of, you know, like his, like, it didn't feel like any kind of progression that led to that. It was just kind of like where, okay, this is the way that, like, we're gonna have this kind of unexpected, kind of turn for him and stuff, and then that way, it just felt very forced and stuff.
Yeah, and then honestly, if he'd figured it out an hour earlier when they had the knife before, well, he could have just done it then and saved us all an hour and lots of death in the process. So yeah, it was one of those things that just really felt crowbarred in there. I mean, similarities, this mummy, she's a plague bringer as well. There's plenty of crows this time being an interesting addition, as well as rats. She's still sucking the life out of victims to rebuild herself, same like the 1999 version. An interesting difference this time is, rather than having mind control over the living, she's now bringing people back from the dead as a zombie army, which was a kind of slight difference. And there's a scene with her vomiting mercury for some reason.
Well, they were pumping into her because, like, apparently mercury kind of keeps the dead at bay, and I think there was like kind of what they were driving at is like that was going to be one of the quote unquote the rules for their universe and stuff. It's like like that mercury is kind of liquid silver, I guess, and stuff. So then they could use it in other weapons. I don't know, I think that's where kind of we're headed and stuff.
Yeah, lots of sort of CGI liquid to solid and back again effects and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I can see where they're going with that. Yeah. So yeah, it didn't really make a lot of sense in general. The other thing that was really dumb for me was the fact that when she makes her original pact with Seth, the god who basically turns on Anubis and betrays him, she then gets her dual pupils, but also all this writing starts appearing as tattoos all over her body. But why is it writing? Surely it would be hieroglyphics if it was ancient Egypt. That made no sense whatsoever. I don't know. Surely someone in the visual design team must have thought, hang on a minute, we're talking about ancient Egypt, not, a form of writing.
I think maybe it was just too much trouble, I guess, to do hieroglyphics on her. So he just went with, let's go with writing, kind of, that way it's kind of could look like squiggly lines and people won't look too carefully at trying to read what you were saying.
Maybe Tom just nixed it. Someone said, oh, actually we should have hieroglyphics. Like, no, we're not doing that.
So yeah, as we talked about, different times, I mean, they were ambitious to kind of envision this kind of dark universe and stuff, but unfortunately it just kind of really fell flat. And then it really, kind of was started and died with this project and stuff. I mean, definitely never really carried it over to the Invisible Man we talked about. which was supposed to be the next one and stuff of the, quote unquote franchise. And yeah.
I mean, I think it lost about somewhere between like what, 60-80 million dollars or something like this. I think it cost the studio. So yeah, it was a pretty bad bomb, this one, I think.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, like I said, it did seem like the other thing was like kind of I guess we haven't talked about it, but the airplane scene was what really caught my attention. It was they widely use it for the trailer and everything like that, but I mean, I could see why they use it for a trailer, because it really highlighted the best part of the movie. Beyond that, it was like kind of what I mean, what was there really to it? They had usual fights and all that kind of stuff, but that was really it. And then like kind of I don't know if we've talked about it, but like it was also like a scene that kind of just has been easily used in a Mission Impossible movie. It was like kind of just the fact that like it was in this mummy movie is kind of like just I mean, there was no real rhyme or reason to why it was like necessary for it to be used and stuff, other than that supposedly it was part of the the death, I guess, for Tom Cruise there and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the only other exciting bit really is kind of underwater zombies chasing Tom Cruise, I guess, under catacombs in some church in England. I don't know if there's many underwater catacombs under churches in England. It's probably quite rare, but or was it in the Tube or something? I can't remember. It doesn't make sense anyway. But yeah.
Courtney B. Vance taking a turn as Tom's superior officer, but really underutilized, unfortunately. But I guess he was I'm sure he was glad to just have another check, I guess, kind of, and moving on. Yeah.
And I mean, we barely mentioned it, but Annabel Wallis is the love interest in this. There's zero chemistry between her and Tom Cruise in this, and we're supposed to believe that he's heartbroken and tries to bring her back to life at the end. It was like, I mean, she has a connection to Star Trek, I believe. She was in one of the movies, or at least on the TV shows or something. That's where I think there's this connection to why
Discovery. What's called? She's Zora, I guess, as the voice. But I mean, I think it's like kind of unfortunate that like if she like kind of didn't really go on from here, because like she's probably doing what she could with the role and stuff, but wasn't much for her. She does end up kind of like on some other horror movies, like the Annabelle movie stuff with the creepy doll, and the kind of and most recently another James Wan movie, Nicholas, which was kind of pretty successful. So or at least did okay and stuff. And I mean, so it's just one of those things where like she was just pretty much in this role, just stock character. I mean, there wasn't much to like I said why we should believe it. Tom
she's just there to just provide some exposition on how the mummy works, or where she comes from, and a bit of theory crafting about how to beat her, basically. I mean, Sofia Botella puts in a better kind of performance, even though she doesn't have very many lines, but there's great sort of physicality to her role, and she does a pretty convincing job, given what a train wreck this movie is. Kudos to her for sort of pulling a sincere performance as the mummy in this.
Definitely. I don't think anybody's acting credits much help there, but I guess for the most part people have survived it. I guess like a lot of different folks are kind of they do all right on their own, I guess, in other ways, in other projects.
Absolutely. So ranking the mummy movies, where would you put them?
Definitely, of course, 1999 for the most fun and stuff. The Hammer was kind of, I don't know. Hammer Films was okay. I think like kind of that one has its moments and stuff, but I think going back to it, it has to be the original for kind of like just like what set it off. So that's probably it.
I mean, I actually enjoyed, normally with these, there'll be a more modern version that I enjoy more than the original, just because black and white filmmaking from the 1930s is pretty slow, in all honesty. But I think I actually preferred the original. I mean, I'd probably still say I would more happily rewatch the 1999 version, because it's more fun, but I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
you've got to give the slight tip of the hat to the 1931 for being the first, and it's still a good movie.
Yeah.
And then I would say the Hammer one is still interesting in its own way, and there's some nice
Yeah.
performances, but it's quite dull. It's one of the it's a really slow Hammer movie.
Yeah.
Not really much happens for the first hour, and
Yeah.
then the last 20 minutes is where all the action is.
Right. That's
And
true.
then right at the bottom of the list, unfortunately, is the 2017.
Yeah. No doubt.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how I would go with them. And I guess next we are in our monster month of October. We're moving on to Frankenstein.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one that will be interesting to kind of both to watch and discuss. And yeah, we'll continue on from there with the Wolfman series and stuff. So yeah, well, that'll be our continuation of the Dark Universe, I guess.
Yeah.
So once again, I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the movies.